Yes, what is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another Rugby Muscle podcast. I'm your host, as always, TJ, and today we are going to continue the Rugby Muscle Applied series with another video on programming for rugby. So we've already discussed exactly how you should look at your long-term programming, how you should be able to plan out to be able to accomplish all the different things that you need to get better at as a rugby player. We've also then spoken about how you'll be able to plan out every single week or a single week in order to make sure that you're getting the most out of every week to train and make progress. And now we're actually going to talk about how that progress is actually being made, because it's a big thing where people talk about a program and they never really discuss progression. It's very often I see people talking about their programs and they talk about exercises and weights and they talk about day A, day B, or Monday chest or whatever they talk about. And they don't talk about what happens on week 2 or week 3 and how they progress through each training program or each mesocycle or even from week to week. And that's what we're going to discuss in this video, exactly how you would do that, because it's not just as simple as making progress, as you'll see in this video. So we're going to discuss the most important factor. We're going to discuss exactly what you should be doing for hypertrophy and aerobic work, how you'll be able to progress that, why it's kind of simple, but why you still need to make sure you pay attention. Strength, power, and speed, why you have to pay a bit more attention to this stuff. Movement and core, what that entails. And then how you would manage your fatigue from week to week, because it's not just a case of, like I said before, making progress on everything. It's a case of being really selective, and hopefully you've already got that from the videos that we've put out by now. If you haven't, go back and check out the rest of the channel. If you're new, check out all of the channel and make sure you're subscribed. And if you're watching this and you've already made it 2 minutes in and you think this is a video you're going to enjoy, click that thumbs up right now. It really does help out the YouTube channel. Well, it helps out the algorithm. And ask any comments. Let me know what you think of this video. Let me know what you'd like to see to expand upon these videos in the comments below. Or if you're just enjoying them, please let me know in the comments below. It really does help out the channel. And for obviously, if you're listening on the podcast, just continue listening, but you'll find this a more detailed discussion in the video because we've got some assistance via the video. Anyway, let's move forward. So first things first, when we're talking about progressing week to week, it's progression is something when we talk about in training that we kind of talk about how we have to do it, but we don't also address that it's something that happens because we train so well. So it's not it's kind of like it's kind of hard to wrap your head around, right? But what I've done is I've used this the best analogy I can think of is what we've got here with the little plant bud. So at the beginning, this plant is such a tiny little shoot that it doesn't require a lot of minerals and sunlight in order to grow. It just needs a little bit, and it will grow quite a bit bigger. That's all. And if you see from the small one to the medium-sized one, it's like doubled in size or tripled in size. It's got a lot bigger, right? Now, because it's bigger, it requires more sunlight, it requires more minerals, but it's got more surface area, so it's able to take them in order to keep growing. And then it gets bigger because of that more sunlight, the more minerals it took on, and was able to grow even more. That's exactly what your training is like. Progression is not just something that you have to do to push forward. It's something that you do because of the training. It's not just a reason. It's both. It works on both ends of the training spectrum, right? You can't just take week 1 and week 2 and say this is the progress we're going to make on week 2 and that will be fine. Because then you've got to look at week 3. What happens then? And that's why progression is really important to sort of absolutely wrap your head around, right? We must progress in order to create adaptation, because giving ourselves more stimulus in order to grow is what we need to grow even more, to grow even more, to grow even more. And I say grow, but progress in whichever manner you wish to progress. But by the same token, we can only progress if we've made that adaptation from the previous week. So it's both a cause and a consequence of training. And the best way to really get progression is to stay as consistent as possible. Most people, I've said before in these videos, most people go into the gym and then they figure out what they want to do once they're in the gym, and then they do random things, and it's really difficult to be able to actually gauge and elicit progression if you're doing that. If you're doing a different exercise week to week to week, how are you ever going to be certain that you're making more progress or you're even making any progress at all? If you go from a 60 kilo front squat and then you go to a 65 kilogram back squat in week 2, what does that even mean? Is that more weight, or is that an easier movement? And then you go back. It's really difficult to sort of gauge these things. And so really, you've got to have that consistency week to week to week throughout at least a whole training block, making progress, and then before you switch that block. You can't just keep switching your focus, because that just gives you far too little consistency, which is going to give you little progress because you're not able to monitor it and figure out how you're making progress. Same thing can be mentioned for like environment. So ideally, you're going to be training at the same time each day. If you've watched the previous video that I did on how you would set up your week, you know that that's also good for habit formation, but it's also good to create better data, because if you're training at the same time every single day, you're pretty much going to be in a similar sort of state. Whereas if you do, let's use the 65 kilogram back squat, we do that at 5 p.m., when we're primed after work and we've had a great lunch and feel really good. Then the next week we do it at 5:30 a.m. after 2 hours sleep and we're hungover. It's not going to be the same stimulus, because it's going to be a lot more difficult to do in different environments. And then also, as I've said before, you've got to create that consistency with the movements, with the training systems. You could say, oh, I'm doing a 50-meter sprint to work on my speed, and I'm going to increase that to 100 meters. Are you still working your speed if you're doing 100 meters? Is it really applicable to rugby? Is that the same stimulus? We're going to sort of explain that in the rest of this video and throughout these video series. So hopefully that makes complete sense, right? And then it's also, so we understand that we've got to be consistent, but it's not a case of just adding progressing, right? Every bit of progression is going to be increased stimulus, right? Because we've increased that stimulus from the previous week. That stimulus will still increase fatigue. Like, even if you're a very strong person and are capable of squatting 200 kilograms, that still has some sort of, like overall absolute weight that the body can't tolerate. The body will still find fatiguing no matter what, no matter how strong you are. Even if you're capable of squatting 300 kilograms, a 200 kilogram squat is still going to be pretty damn fatiguing, whereas a 40 kilogram squat might not be at all for some people. And then the more you progress, the more you increase stimulus, the slower you're going to be able to recover. And sometimes if you cannot recover, that might actually stop you from being able to make progress, as you see from the diagram here. I do, if you've seen some of my other videos, I like this diagram because it does explain the training and adaptation process really well. And so if you just cause too much fatigue, sometimes in order to recover, you might only get back to baseline. Sometimes you get even worse. We've all seen that person, or we've had that effort where we've been, if someone runs a marathon and that's not their training, they're not doing that to train, right? But they've run a marathon, they've created so much fatigue that they're not able to run a marathon the next day or more the next day or more the next day. They've created so much fatigue that they need to take the whole fucking week off. And maybe, all right, they're not going to necessarily come back and be stronger because of that, because they've created too much fatigue versus the stimulus that they want. So you want to have a good stimulus to fatigue ratio. You also want to have a good stimulus to time ratio. So the more you increase stimulus, the more time you're going to take. Like in absolute terms in the gym, if you go from a 20-minute cardio workout to a 25-minute cardio workout, that's 5 extra minutes. And if you keep doing that week to week to week for 50 weeks, then all of a sudden your cardio sessions are taking 4 hours. So there's got to be another way to progress. Incorrect stimulus is where we're not targeting the right one. We're progressing, but potentially in the wrong manner. And we'll get into why that could be in a minute. But understand that if you progress with the wrong stimulus, that will still increase the fatigue, but it's not making the improvements that you want. You're adding a stimulus in the wrong realm, and it's just not going to give you the benefit that obviously the correct stimulus would, or just holding out a maintenance phase might do. So then you make an incorrect adaptation, and sometimes that incorrect adaptation might actually make you worse, or at least the best case scenario, it's just extra time and effort and fatigue that you've wasted not getting better at the area you're going to be. See my 50 meter to 100 meter sprinting example, to understand that a little bit more, right? You double the length that you're sprinting, but is that going to make you faster because you've sprinted now 50 meters instead of 100 meters? Probably not. Is it going to make you more fatigued? Fucking hell yeah, it's going to. So you got to be careful with this stuff. And so really my solution to this would be to make targeted progression. So you only improve you only target to improve in the areas you want to improve. We know we want to improve as a rugby player in 5, 6, 7 different areas, right? We want our conditioning to be better, we want our speed to be better, we want to be more powerful, stronger, bigger, want to be fitter, both aerobically and alactically. We want to be more effective in breakdowns. All of these things we want to improve upon, but if we try to improve upon all of those things at the same time, we're just going to create so much fatigue that we're not able to make any progress. We'll also be overwhelmed by the sheer amount of work that we've got to do. Or we're understimulative. We're spreading our load so thin that we're not able to actually make progress. So watch the previous video, planning the week, to understand that, or watch even the very first video, Periodization 101, to understand how you should be able to plan your training, right? So that you're holding out most things at maintenance, and you've got a few targeted areas, at least one primary area where you're really aiming to make the most progress. That's what you're focusing on. So you make that progress, and then you hold out a maintenance phase after that. And therefore, you're able to bring up all of these different areas that you need to improve upon as a rugby player over the course of, say, 6 months or a year, versus trying to do everything at once for a year and never really getting anywhere. And so when you're doing that maintenance, doesn't mean that you're slacking on anything. You're still trying to put in your best work. And you're still trying to, you still can increase loads, you still can increase speeds, things like that. But you're not pushing for progression. You're just letting the body adapt as it can without causing fatigue that will impact the areas that you are trying to target, the areas that you are really trying to make progress. So what does that actually look like? So if you're going to target your aerobic system and your hypertrophy system, I say hypertrophy system, you're going to try and gain muscle, right? You want to basically just increase total volume, however necessary. It's not a little drink of coffee. It's not a case of one is overly superior. Volume. It's a key phrase that you see in the scientific bodybuilding community, that they say volume is a key driver of hypertrophy, which basically means do more work. Same thing can be said for aerobic work. It's not just a case of doing speed or whatever modality you want to increase to make it more confusing. You just want to get more sheer volume of aerobic work done over a period of time. So if you're targeting the progression for aerobic and hypertrophy, you want to look at increasing the sets and increasing the reps. So from week to week, you go from 10 to 11 to 12 to 13, 14, 15 weeks. And maybe if you can tolerate extra volume, you would go from 3 sets to 4 sets to maybe up to 5 or 6 sets at the end of a training block, and that would be fine. You would increase that. You can do that via different modalities, but you would increase the total sets over a training block where you're focusing on hypertrophy. You'd also look at, if you're doing this for aerobic work, you'd look at increasing the total time that you're spent doing aerobic work, which would also equate to the total distance. They kind of give or take, but it's not a case of, you would still increase the time. Say you ran 5 kilometers in 22 minutes. If you were then to increase the distance to 5.5 kilometers and you still ran that in 22 minutes, you're not really increasing the overall time at all. You're not increasing the time at all, right? You're just running faster. You're increasing the distance. You're doing that because you've got faster. That's not the adaptation we want. We want to push the progression via the actual time spent doing that aerobic work. And so that's what we would target week to week for aerobic work. We would do more total rounds, more total volume of aerobic work. You can do this, and you can do this. You can still increase the total work done with aerobic work by increasing the density. What I mean by that is you would still do more work, but you do it in the same amount of time, because for tempo work, for example, you would take less rest periods. So you could go 15 seconds on, 45 seconds off for week 1, and you would do that for 10 sets. Then maybe on week 2, you do 20 and 40 off, and you would work to probably no more than 25 and 35 off, depending on how hard you go. But that would still be aerobic. The problem is if you then went all the way to trying to do 40 seconds on and 20 seconds off, that might end up being a bit more anaerobic, and then you're not progressing in aerobic because you've changed the systems. Likewise, when you force the weight when you're doing the hypertrophy work, you might end up turning it into more of strength stimulus. So we're causing extra fatigue, and we're not getting the adaptation. That's the incorrect adaptation we was talking about before. So that stuff is going to come naturally. The weight will come naturally. The reps will increase naturally. You're not necessarily going to target them. So if you were doing work on maintenance, over time you would still look to increase the weight that you're using, and maybe increase the reps or weight that you're using. Maybe a mix of both, week to week to week. But you wouldn't look at increasing the sets, especially if you're targeting other areas. Same for aerobic work. You would increase the speed, as we've said before, naturally, because you would just get more comfortable doing that aerobic work, which by virtue would then increase the distance. But you're not going to target and increase that time. You were just going to do enough for maintenance, but you would still hopefully get better. That's a natural adaptation you'll make. You're not targeting the aerobic system to get better this way, but you're still getting better by virtue of just doing enough work. But you're allowing the stimulus to be applied and the target progression to be applied to other areas such as strength, power, and speed. Now this one is a little bit more confusing because strength, power, and speed work is quite really high intensity. It's high fatiguing. It takes a while for the body to become tolerant of it. If you've not ran for people that have been in lockdown for a long period of time might find this. When you get out of lockdown and you go for a sprint and you just do one 100-meter sprint, you'll feel sore the next day. That's because your body's not accommodated or not ready to tolerate any sort of high intensity effort. So you have to do like a medium to high intensity effort. Make sure you're moving well. Make sure your body can accommodate the high intensity work that you're going to do. So you would do an initial prep phase where you would do, 70 to 90%, and you would increase that volume. You could do this forever if you wanted to get stronger, but you would keep increasing that volume and allow your body to become more tolerant of the volume and be able to move better, get more work done, increase work capacity. And once you've got to that, once you've run a good phase of that work, then you would look at really targeting the progression. So if you're looking for strength, you would add weight week to week to week. If you're looking for speed work, you would add speed week to week. And if you're looking for power work, you would try and either increase speed and maintain weight, or you would try and increase weight and maintain speed. You wouldn't let that speed drop. Too often people try and increase their, do power work and progress week to week, but they make an incorrect adaptation because they increase the weight too fast and then they move slowly, and therefore they're not working power, they're just working strength kind of poorly, right? Overall, what you're going to find with this is that the total volume will drop. That's okay because the intensity is increasing, and that's what we're looking for. It's almost a complete opposite of when we're looking at the aerobic and the hypertrophy work, where your volume has to increase to accommodate. This, you have to decrease to accommodate because the work is becoming more and more intense and more fatiguing. We have to be more and more precise with the work that we're doing. Final note on when we're looking at speed and power, sometimes you can actually even drop the weight or the load, the resistance, in order to work more speed, right? So if we're doing medicine ball throws, sometimes we'll go from a 10 kilogram medicine ball to an 8 kilogram medicine ball to a 6 kilogram medicine ball. Now you think that means that we're using less force, but we're actually going to be using more force because we're going to move more powerfully. We're going to move it with more speed, and therefore we're increasing, if we're moving more powerfully, we're working power more efficiently. But when you're doing this, also be aware sometimes that when you increase complexity, because that might end up dropping the intensity you're able to use. So only use, you don't necessarily have to progress from like a high pull to a high clean or a squat clean. That's not necessarily a progression that's going to benefit you when it comes to power or speed. You might increase weight, and yes, you might increase complexity. It's not going to increase your speed more because you're having to then think about all the different technicalities of the movement. So really just be aware of that stuff. Then when it comes to core and movement work, remember this stuff is the bottom of the pyramid. You want to look at, again, another initial accommodation phase, not necessarily because it's so fatiguing, but just because you want to be able to move as efficiently as possible. So you're looking for that efficiency increase, because what you'll find is when you first start to do core work, your efficiency will drop quite fast. You'll move really well to begin with, and then as you move on and keep going, like as the sets go on, you find that you start to move quite poorly and find them all fatiguing. So the better you get, in those higher volume ranges, then you can allow yourself to be able to progress. And when you're making targeted progression, you're going to look at either complexity or intensity. So you can make a movement more complex by adding resistance bands in certain areas, making the lead, like adding different directional weights, or making the movement more complex. You could do a bear crawl, but then you could do a bear crawl on a wheel, or you could do a bear crawl. I'm sort of drawing a blank, in different directions. You could do so many different things that you could do for movement, where you would increase that complexity, right? Or you would increase intensity. So if it's movement, you would move a little bit more faster. If it's core work, you would just add more resistance, either longer levers, or just, if you're doing a plank, you could extend your elbows from here, in level with your chin, to in level with your eyes, to even further away. Or you could add a weight plate on your back, or in the small of your back. That would then increase that intensity. Volume at that point should be kept around the same. You don't need to decrease it because it's not overly fatiguing, but you don't need to increase it because there's no need. You're getting the progression from doing that stuff. Other thing is, this gets quite difficult because it's probably the most subjective and the most boring. It's difficult to gauge. With the other stuff, you can see numbers going up week to week to week, and that's really motivating. Whereas with this stuff, like, maybe you're moving better, it requires a lot more detailed notes, maybe videos to be done, or just a lot more patience. And it's something that can almost just keep going in the background almost indefinitely, and you're able to make progress. Or you really target the movement and the core for an initial block where you're only targeting this. And again, it might be a little bit more boring than the other stuff, but if you really target and start moving well and good enough to do all the other stuff and facilitate all the other adaptations you can do, then you're good to go. And just beware that every time, like, the more that you neglect this stuff, the core and the movement work, when you're pushing the other areas, this one does have a big case of, like, really degrading, right? Sometimes people, they'll go from 100 kilo squat to 140 kilo squat in a few months, but that squat is just a lot worse movement, and then their overall core, maybe not their core, but their movement really does degrade and looks a lot worse, at the end of that training block. So that you need to reassess quite often. And then finally, managing fatigue week to week. So this isn't a fatigue video where we're going to talk about all the different recovery methods. This is just like the real basics, and essentially really all you need. Now, we're going to do another video talking about recovery methods and stuff, but that's just because people ask about it all the bloody time. But this slide and this 2-minute explanation or 30-second explanation is all you need. Really, all you've got to do is keep your training volumes in a smart range. So it's difficult to say what sort of volumes that would be because we're looking at so many different modalities, right? But you would keep your distances not too crazy. You would keep your overall sets not too crazy. Sets would be like 80 to 120 is usually what we come out of a total weekly volume that we would expect. 120, the higher side being on the end of a training cycle, the lower side being at the beginning or in season. You could even drop lower than that. That would be fine. It would depend how you feel, right? But keeping your training volumes in a decent range that you're able to recover is really, really important. And then fucking sleep, staying consistent, and eating your food. Like, that's about all you need to do in order to manage fatigue. You don't necessarily have to force progression if it's not there. Just let it come, and then get on top of the other stuff. Now, other stuff that you can look at is like making sure that you've got one full day of recovery week to week to week. That would be really important. You've got people that are putting hashtag team no days off. They're not taking a day off, but then they're sleeping 5 hours, and then they're spending another hour trying to use that fucking massage tool or do whatever recovery modalities, and they're going into the ice bath and whatever. All of that stuff's a waste of time. Just take one day off a week to allow your body to rest. Then the other thing is looking at regularly, we've sort of alluded to it earlier, but when you're looking at creating a training program, you want it to be 4 to 8 weeks long, and then that would be your macro cycle, and then you would reset your volume. So you'd either take a deload at the end of that, or you'd start a new training block at such low volumes that then you're able to dissipate all that fatigue from the previous training block. Remember why progression happens. Progression is not something that you just force. It's something that happens because you're able to train, recover, and come back stronger. Stay patient with all this stuff, and you will be able to make more progress in a year if you plan this stuff properly and you do it in this manner than you ever thought possible. It is like, this is the secret that most people don't want to be patient enough and just don't want to hear it. But this is the stuff that really works. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you guys so much for listening. As usual, if you've made it, definitely if you've made it to the end, hit me up with a comment below. Let me know what you think about this sort of stuff, and let me know what you try and do week to week. Let me hit me with any questions. I'd love to hear what you think about it in the comments below. Thumbs up, 5-star reviews on the podcasts. Check out rugby-muscle.com for all your training needs and nutrition needs, and I'll see you when I can click this finish button. Cheers.